Heading overseas now, the U.S. is pledging to send additional weapons to Ukraine to defend against Russia's latest attacks. In addition, Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the Biden administration will begin sending American diplomats back to Ukraine this week. It's part of the West's unified effort to show support for the country under siege. Earlier, Secretary Blinken praised the success of Ukraine's military, along with the allies' ongoing support over 2 months into the war.
Their success is primarily because of their incredible courage and determination, but it's also because we were able to equip them with what they needed. For every tank that the Russians have had in Ukraine, we've managed with 30 allies and partners in one way or another to provide about 10 anti-armor systems. For every plane that the Russians have flown in the skies, there have been about 10 anti-aircraft munitions of one kind or another. But as you point out, the nature of this battle is changing to eastern and southern Ukraine. They're adapting to that. We're adapting to that. We spent a great...
CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay joins us with more from Kyiv. Chris, good to see you again. In addition to what Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in those congressional hearings today, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says while in the region that it's the administration's goal to weaken Russia's military capability. It's a bit of a change in U.S. strategy that speaks now to sort of a broader ambition. How are you seeing that play out on the ground in Ukraine, if at all? And is this essentially now making the conflict in Ukraine a proxy battle between these two superpowers?
Well, there are lots of ways to see it. Perhaps the easiest with the naked eye is all the burnt-out tanks around here. Not just burnt-out tanks and other armored vehicles, a lot of captured Russian tanks and armored vehicles that are now in the possession of Ukraine. Thousands upon thousands of them. In fact, you know, I've seen them myself in and around Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine. There are also tank graveyards just all over the city of Kyiv and other areas from which the Russian forces have now retreated. So this is certainly weakening Russia's ability to continue its invasion of Ukraine and perhaps to invade other countries in the region that are feeling under threat.
And that tank graveyard caused in part by the weapons and the training that the Ukrainians would have gotten from the Americans and from NATO allies, right? That's what you're implying.
Absolutely. And I should also mention just the number of troops that Russian forces have lost here. By the Ukrainian count, it's more than 20,000 Russian soldiers who have died here. That is just a tremendous amount of casualties in only 2 months of war, Ed.
Yeah. Now, the Germans today also announced plans to provide much more military aid to Ukraine, sort of on the same wavelength here. What more can you tell us about what they're promising to send?
Right. Well, they're planning on sending these Gepard anti-aircraft tanks. What's really significant about this, perhaps, is the symbolism. I mean, they were under a lot of pressure, both domestically and internationally, namely from the United States and other major Western countries that had also promised aid to Ukraine. Germany was really becoming isolated. You also have to take into consideration Germany's history after World War II. It went through a painstaking process of demilitarization and not wanting to have a big military and ever possibly be seen as an aggressor ever again. This is something that Russia was probably counting on, and it's just one more sign of how remarkably well the West and NATO in particular has rallied around the cause of Ukraine. I mean, if Germany is able to overcome some of its baggage from World War II, then Russia must certainly be feeling that weight and possibly questioning its decision to invade Ukraine from the very beginning.
Yeah, whether it's the politics in Germany, whether it's Finland and Sweden thinking about joining NATO, whether it's other changes in military strategy and aid across continental Europe, you're right. It's profound how quickly things have transformed across the continent. The other development today we're tracking, the UN Secretary General's been to Moscow and says President Putin has agreed in principle to UN and Red Cross intervention in Mariupol, that port city, of course, that's been besieged and really destroyed by the Russians. Pledges like this have been made before. But is there any sense of when we might see this happen? And whether this time, and the assurances the Russian president may have made here to the UN Secretary General, will be any different?
I wouldn't hold my breath, Ed. We've seen these types of noises come out of Moscow in the past. Just to give you some perspective, about a week ago, Vladimir Putin told his forces around that steel mill in Mariupol that's been a fortress to approximately 1,000 civilians and this group of die-hard defenders. He told the soldiers there to back down and to stop trying to siege the area and to just essentially let the people inside die. The very next day, the bombardment continued again, and the Ukrainian forces there reported that they were under siege. We've heard these types of things over and over again. We've heard Russian forces make promises of providing safe passage via humanitarian corridors from Mariupol, only to hear the Ukrainians complain that those same humanitarian corridors were being fired upon. And this is a critical point to keep in mind anytime negotiations are brought up between Ukraine and Russia, because Ukraine has been given no reason over and over again to trust anything that Moscow says.
Well, Chris Livesay in Kyiv, Ukraine tonight for us. Thank you to you. Thank you to your team. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ed.